Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the Canyon. Welcome back to an installment of, geez, I don't know. It's from the comments very loosely, not directly. No one asked me a specific question that precipitated what is about to happen, but I do get shock questions. I get shock questions, I get shock comments, and I figure, you know what? Let's do a thing. Let's do a thing where we break down shocks. Suspension theory via the Canyon about crawler shocks. Now, for some background, I came from the Go Fast world, and shock tuning is equal parts art and science because there is a distinct and important relationship between the viscosity of the damping fluid and the spring that is fitted to the outside of that damper. Like they have a relationship. The fluid is controlling the damping rate, which means it is controlling both how fast the shock extends and how fast the shock collapses. You build into a shock for a vehicle which jumps something called PAC, which is how something about, I don't claim to be a physicist, something about the fluid dynamics and the way that the fluid moves through the holes in the piston. As the shock compresses further and further, it becomes more and more difficult to pass that fluid through the piston holes. So what happens is your shock acts soft at the top, and then at full compression, at the bottom of the stroke, the shock becomes much more firm. So this is so that when you jump, you can... So in Go Fast stuff, we would always do a drop test where you would hold your vehicle up about 16 to 18 inches off the ground and drop it. And it should just go, and then settle down like that. Crawlers, they don't have to do that. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And I think that's beautiful. I know that there are a lot of people out there that do a thing where they run what is definitely called full droop, where they run no springs, so there is no rebound. I'm not expressly, I don't know how 100% support this, unless I guess your vehicle is purely rock crawling. Like you never even have to drive from one spot to the other. But I don't like the suspension sitting on the axle, even when, and you'll see on some of the examples here, I'm running incredibly soft springs. But still, if there is any rebound, the spring is going to work, and you're going to have some suspension action. If you're running no spring, you're basically only given control over extension, not over compression, because the oil, it's now going to be linear. It's a lot easier to show with a shock than to show by going like this. So we'll start by just offering up what comes on vehicles. This is a typical axial shock. This is the plastic-bodied 90mm Gentleman that you will receive on many axial vehicles. It comes in the Raw Builders kit. It comes on the Honcho. It's going to come on any of the non-premier RTRs. If you move up a little... This is a Capra version, so this one is 96mm, but it is ostensibly the same shock. It's got a little bit of upgrade to it. It has a larger bore. It has bleeder caps, which bleeder cap on an emulsion shock, and we'll get into the difference between emulsion shocks and standard shocks. It's got some nice additions to it, but it is built in the typical and the traditional axial fashion, which is these are effectively the same type of shock. Like we've got the same type of clamping collar. We have the less than optimal clamp. We've got the less than optimal clamping collar on here, which just pulls off. This one does indeed attach, so they are clamped together, so you don't have to worry about this, because what is the point of a clamping collar if it doesn't hold? But in traditional axial fashion, effectively none of the parts are compatible between one another. This has a smaller bore. This has, like everything is different. The caps don't transfer over. Nothing transfers over. And also in traditional axial fashion, as has been said on the internet many times, the only axial shock that doesn't leak is the one that has not been built yet. So that is pretty well evidenced here. We've got a decent amount of goopus down there. It is, hear that squeak? That's loss of oil. So this guy probably needs to be rebuilt. This guy was built during the builder's kit build. So he has not leaked. He has never been fitted to a video. I mean, to a vehicle, and yet still, see that little guy right there? I'm gonna have, there's that shine. Yeah, I mean, give it a couple strokes, it's still gonna leak. So there are your two axial options, and you will find these in a variety of lengths, depending on what they're fitted to, whether it be the 10.3, whether it comes on a 10.2 that is fitted with the aluminum bodied shocks, whether it comes on a Capra. You're going to find a variety of different lengths. I've only seen this gentleman in 90 millimeter option. You're going to see, we've got 3 basic offerings from Element. We've got, this is the RTR shock. It does have, this is incision hardware on the bottom, so ignore that. It's just very typical stuff, non-clamping. It runs this little short rod end. Ignore this. I made these to go to the S8, to the SE hardware. This is a factory team shock, and the sum total of difference between the factory team shock and the RTR grade shock is that this guy has a hard anodized body. The body is anodized inside and out. This will help. It will make the shock smoother, but it will make the shock smoother like this much. There is a third Element option, which is the plastic bodied. I do not have one removed or assembled because I'm only running 1 set of them. Here is what the bodies look like. Like, I mean, you can see. It's the same thing. Only it isn't. They axialed us a little because these are plastic bodies, and plastic bodies need a little more beef to them so that they don't flex. The walls are thicker. So the SE shocks run a 1 millimeter smaller piston. It is actually smaller around. So you can, all the parts transfer. You can take all the parts out of this and put it in this, except the pistons, and vice versa. This piston is too big to fit in here, and this piston will fit in there, but it will, and it's not going to work. So 3 options from Element, but they're all the same, effectively. Plastic body, regular body, hard anodized body. The thing about the Element shock is that I have said a fine shock. Inarguably a fine shock. They work fantastically. These are ridiculously smooth. These are very, very close. Very difficult to tell the difference. Like if it was a blind test and they were fitted with the same sort of spring and you couldn't see the hard anode coating, they would feel very similar. It is definitely a shock that I would say if it comes on your RTR, you have absolutely no need to replace these. If these come on a kit, these are fantastic. But I don't recommend that anyone go out and buy these because they're $90 a set. $90. I don't think that those are $90 shocks. I think they're great, especially when there was a time you could buy a Gatekeeper kit for $219 and get the whole kit with a Stealth. So it was basically, you were paying for a Stealth, 4 shocks, and 1 axle, and then everything else was complimentary with your purchase. So fantastic shocks as included. I'm not saying anyone could run out and buy them. Following that, so we've got Axial, we've got Element, and then of course we have Traxxas. I almost misspoke in the future and said that Traxxas is very mono-spec on their shocks. This is not true. They make the GTS and they make the GTS for the long arm. So they make a 90 millimeter, and I want to say the long arm is a 110. So, but it's identical. Like all the parts, the shaft and the spring are the only parts that are different between a regular 90mm GTS and a long arm 110. I can muddy up the waters a little bit. I'll pull this guy down. Here is there's the long arm. It's same cups, same everything. They are identical shocks. Same color. All the parts are the same, except the shaft, which has to be longer, and the spring, which has to be longer. So there are no differences. So in effect, Traxxas is mono spec. They just make a longer version, at least with the GTS. We'll get into other Traxxas shocks in a moment. The GTS is one of my favorite shocks, despite its shortcomings. Its shortcomings being that it uses the type of cap that threads into the body. It doesn't thread over the body. So this not only threads over the body, but has a bleeder screw, which is very helpful in building an emulsion shock. Traxxas threads into the body and has no method of bleeding. It has no bleeder hole. It has a little slot inside the cap, which building one of these and filling one of these can verge on the infuriating for someone who has not done it before. But once they are built, and every shock that you will see today, save for these guys, was removed from a vehicle. So this shock has been and is in service. And it feels great. It feels great. They don't leak. Yella runs GTS just like that. He has run them since he was built, because we purloined parts for one vehicle from another and moved them around. So instead of running these elements, he's been running those since he was built. And the tops of his spring cups are bone dry. There's not a drop of oil on them. Traxxas, say what you will, say what you want, they are good at building a shock. They really are. And you will see coming up. Two of my most recommended shocks are Traxxas. Then we've got the other offering. This is semi-premier. These are Incision S8Es, and my brain had never put 2 and 2 together, or more accurate to this, 8 and 8 together. Why do they call them both the S8E? And it is because they have an 8mm bore, which in crawler terms, I guess, is a bigger bore. It's not huge, but like tiny. Like you can see how much spring space there is there. So what we're left with is having to call this one the S8E 80mm and the S8E 90mm. Incision gives us good and bad, but they give us both good and bad. They give us locking spring collars, which is great. They don't give us any kind of provision. Oh, that shock needs rebuilt. That kind of comes back around to an axial shock, where the construction of these, and the more you look at them, it's a bit of a hybrid. We've got a cap that threads in, but it's got a bleeder cap. We've got probably the best clamping, because you can see there the actual rod end has a little tab. Like, they're not just clamping, they're actually bolted together, which really helps. And then if your spring fitment is, this is a stock Incision spring. If your spring fitment is tight, you don't have to worry about this kind of stuff happening. And that does happen because we often overextend the length of the spring. But there are drawbacks to the Incision, which is why I'm running so many of them. I mean, I've built a lot of Phoenix, and these come on Phoenix, so the shocks end up. But okay, let me run it. Let me run it. These are S8Es, and I think I'm running them on one Phoenix vehicle, or vehicle that started as a Phoenix, is running S8Es. They get passed around to whatever new build. They're not an optimum shock to me because they don't have the same leakiness level as an axial. But for a shock of their caliber and price point, they're pretty leaky. They're in service a lot because they make an 80. And for whatever reason, in crawlers, 80s are kind of an oddball. There's not a lot of choices in 80. There's a couple. In 90, we've got, 90, 90, 90, 90, 90, 180 so far. So these get run a lot, but they do things that I don't understand. Like, why is this all shiny? Just run the threads up like Traxxas. Give us more adjustment. Because if you give us more well, let's put the 90 against the 90. So there's, like, just look how much more threads. So we can run different length springs. A lot of shock manufacturers, to me, it seems like they assume, oh, this is how it comes. This is the spring that it comes fitted with. This is how you're going to run it. That's almost never the case. Like, finding a vehicle that actually works perfectly on the springs that it came with is super rare. I am scrolling through the mental database trying to think if there's any vehicle here running the springs as fitted. Maybe the Banana was running blue-gray striped for a while. Like, it started off, but it still isn't now, but it started off running them. I don't think anyone else is. Everybody has been resprung. You will at some point, if you get obsessive, you will end up, this has been one of three. You will end up with something like this, because most of the springs they provide us are far too stiff. The springs that Element provides on this yellow band, I want to say are 2.63 pounds per inch. Compare that to, this is a Dravtech. Because we're not taking it off sick jumps, bro. We don't. 2.63 pounds per inch per corner. So if you were fitted with 4 yellows, that's over 10 pounds. If your vehicle weighed 10 pounds, it could compress the shock almost all the way. Like at ride height, it would probably sit right about there. I mean, if you've got a 10-pound rig, I guess, but... And mind you, that's 10 pounds of sprung weight. So that doesn't include the axles or the wheels or anything. So your total rig weight would have to be like 15 or 16 pounds in order to use a spring like that. Or lay them way down. And I don't know if we'll get to that. So this is essentially, now, yeah, there's going to be a lot of other stuff. If you get anything not from the big guys, I would consider these the big 4 here. Elsewhere, you're going to have more access to Cross, Charisma, MST, RGT, even FMS, etc., etc. Anybody that's not the big boys, they're going to give you shocks. And for the most part, most of those shocks are, like, G-Made RSDs are okay. I've tried a number of G-Made shocks. And the end of it is, like, they come with springs even stiffer than that. We're talking like 4 pounds per inch springs. It's almost like they just tasked another division. They went over to the buggy guys or the truggy guys and were like, yeah, we need a shock. So there are shocks with like 19 millimeter OD springs. So there are instances where your tire is almost hitting the spring because it's so big. I don't necessarily favor a shock that's super skinny. Like, this shock is skinny, but it still has a nice sized bore. The bore is bigger than the spring because now they've given us the ability to pseudo Dravtech. Speaking of Dravtech, if we're getting into aftermarket options, this is a Dravtech. This is a Dravtech. They call them super shorts or ultra shorts. So it's an 80, which is what it replaced. This replaced an S8E. These are gorgeous. The machining, everything about them is fantastic. And building and configuring a set of Dravtechs would cost you about the same as buying a set of these if they didn't come on your vehicle as the factory team elements. And I will take this shock over this shock any day. This is a bladdered shock. This is more of a finicky shock to build, but what a fantastic shock. And they come in a variety of lengths. And you have another option that is perhaps not as pretty, but we certainly have another option. This is a 90 millimeter version. This is the venerable Traxxas 2660, the original big bore. These have been around for over 15 years. And you might notice some familial similarity. So this body has been machined down and rethreaded. But DriveTech takes these to make these. Like, see, they machine a better land down at the bottom. This is just how a 2660 comes out of the package. The bottom of this is just the hardware from an SE, from an Element SE shock. They're also built with bladders. They are astoundingly smooth, and they are, more importantly, in crawler shock terms, relatively inexpensive. You're talking $50-some a set, just like in the $55 range. And Traxxas makes, I can never remember all the numbers. It's like the 2660, the 2662, and something else. They do make 3 lengths. This is the short. They make a shorter one, and they make a longer one. And it's basically like 80, 90, 100. So they do the 3 lengths that most of us will need. Most of us are just going to be operating 80, 90, 100. God help you if you end up in a situation where you need a 70mm shock, because the industry does not care. The industry does not consider 70mm to be a shock. And you go up to about 120, and if you get longer than 120, like something to put on a Rift, you're going to get like a 140 shock. You're going to end up with whatever. I didn't bother to get the Rift down and take shocks off of it, because I don't run a Rift shock on anything that's not a Rift or the size of a Rift. If you're looking at something with a 14, 15-inch wheelbase, yeah, you can, that doesn't have 6 wheels. If it has 4 wheels and a 16-inch wheelbase, you're probably going to need something like a 140, 150mm shock, but most of us are not. So these, and you'll notice, my aftermarket options are here and here. I almost neglected. The Desert Lizard, much maligned, and I think unfairly so. In terms of bore, like they talk about big bore in terms of the Traxxas and the SADs. No, that is more of a big bore. Like we've got a traditionally sized piston. We have springing options. This is what they call half droop. So it's constantly pulling the piston up a little bit. You can also run full droop. You can run them conventionally. You can run them right side up. You can run them upside down. I try to run them upside down whenever possible, because no matter what shock it is, no matter how well it was built or how badly it was built, if you run it upside down, the oil is going to leak out more slowly, if at all. I'm running Desert Lizards on a number of vehicles that I'm not sure I can 100% count. Wiley, Rusty, Zoidberg, Jolly Green. So that's 20-some. So 6, 4, 4, 4. Yeah, I'm running 18 Desert Lizard shocks. I will be using these in an upcoming build. And just for y'all today, if you have some woodworking ability, make yourself one of these, because it makes filling them a lot easier. If you're not dealing with Desert Lizards, you can just take something and drill some holes in it, because it will also make filling shocks a lot easier rather than holding them while the air bubbles dissipate. So in aftermarket terms, I consider these 3. And there's a 4th aftermarket option if you're fitting a shock to a vehicle that did not come with that shock. And it is this one right here. It is the GTS. These shocks are great. I see no need to replace them. They're great. But I don't recommend that you buy them, because they are too expensive. And there's no real part out option for them. The SAD is a shock I certainly don't recommend that you buy. If they come on the vehicle, you can make them work. Just understand that they are going to have more frequent of a service interval than other shocks. They are a little bit leaky. These guys down here are the least leaky. Most leaky, these will leak. They're right in here. The Element shock is a strange paradox. They work so good. Now, if Element put out a package that was like, buy a 4-pack of these for $50, or even if they did a 4-pack of the SEs with the plastic bodies for, say, $40, I would be like, that's a pretty good deal. But as it's like 90 for these, and I think if you want to buy, I don't even know if you can buy the RTR body shocks. I don't think you can. I think the only shocks that you can buy completely shockable with all the parts, with springs and everything, are the factory teams at $90 a set. And it's ridiculous because, like I said, $90 a set, mid-50s, low 50s. And then these as an aftermarket option, absolutely. The Traxxas GTS, the drawbacks being a little finicky to fill, and that they come in 90 millimeter and 110 millimeter. Most of us are going to need 90s, but you can obtain them from Jenny's RC in Egg Harbor, New Jersey, parted out from RTRs for usually around $40 a set, which makes these the low-cost leader. It really does. And they are built atomically as Traxxas makes things. They will fit any shock spring. You can fit a Trax. This is a Traxxas spring, but I have Traxxas shocks running element springs, running incision springs, you name it. Like the drawbacks being, again, like I say, no easy method to bleed, and you are stuck running a full-size spring. You can't convert it to the small spring if you want to, because there's really no land down there. But they pretty much make the best seals on the market. You will have to service your TRX4 shocks, the GTS shocks, sometime between seldom and never. Like you fill them and then you run them and they just go. I've never had a cap pull out. I've never had a rod end pull out. I've never bent a shaft on one. They're great. And these go the same way. And these will even get you nitrided shafts. Traxxas is great on these because they've been selling us the same shock for over 15 years. And, you know, if it ain't broke, why fix it? So that might say, oh, well, someone might say, well, I don't want to spend $40 on a set of shocks. I want to spend $20 on a set of shocks. To which I would say, don't. We have tested and we have gone through a great number. We tested these. Amazon, I think they're like $18 for a set of 4. These are absolutely horrendous. Most of the stuff from RC 4-wheel drive is absolutely horrendous. They're going to leak. They're going to require being filled with differential fluid. You're going to have to put like what is equivalently 500 weight shock oil, and we will get into shock oil weights here in a minute. We have tried various other Amazon shocks. We've tried shocks like this, which fall into the same pitfall that this out-of-frame bag does, which is they're like, let's put a 3.5 millimeter shaft on it. Let's put an oversized shock shaft on it. But the body hasn't gotten any bigger. So what does that mean? Body same size, shaft got bigger. That means the O-rings got smaller. Amazon is not going to give you a quality O-ring to begin with. They're going to give you Buna O-rings most of the time instead of silicone. So they are not going to stop the oil from flowing out. They are going to leak profusely. Like these are pretty wet down here at the bottom. Pretty wet. And if you gave it some cycles, we could push out more. I do not recommend. Again, another Amazon option. These came with a cantilever kit. Again, you see the 3.5 millimeter shaft because you see that the step where it steps down to 3 millimeter thread. It's going to use some odd size piston. It's going to use very small O-rings. Very small, very thin cross section. These are going to leak. They are not going to be smooth. In my experience, and I have tested too many Amazon shocks, that being some jumble of vowels or consonants of a brand that you've never heard of, something non-specific. This is the only shock that I have found works. These are, to the best of my estimation, absolute 100% clones of RC foil drive shocks like the Old Man Emus and stuff like that in all the different colors. This is what I run on my Marlin, my Trailfinder 2. I replaced the white shocks simply because I wanted black ones. And when I ordered these and put them on, I was like, oh, they're the same exact shock. Are they a high-performance shock? No. Do they have to be filled with differential fluid? Yes. These have 7,000 CST oil in them to give them any sort of damping at all. And they've already built, you'll watch, whoop, shock goes in, and then you'll get a point where it just kind of drops past. We're getting the emulsion back in a little better, but like these go on a leafer, so we're not like, we're not trying to obtain the absolute optimum in performance. These I consider to be an option because the RC four-wheel drive ones are priced as expensive as any of these, if not more so. And the relative performance level is not, it's not there. So if you're replacing something that looks like this, and also these came with the cool little bladder, the little shock boots. I thought they looked cool. But I mean, performance-wise, I would categorize them sort of over here. They're not great, but they are cheap. Might have been $20 for the set, maybe. They work. If we're talking about a real shock, it's these guys right here. This is the premiumest of premium options. And then I would say 2660s. If your rig needs a 90 and you want to build sort of fake Dravtex, this is the way to go. If you want a shock that you never have to mess with again, GTS. And where does that Desert Lizard fall? The Desert Lizard is a shock that comes with, when you buy the shock in the little thing, it's got all the springs, it's got all the different levels of pistons. The versatility of those pistons, we won't address that because they come pre-assembled. So the seal packs are pre-assembled under here. They're pretty easy to take apart. You see a little split ring, you just pop that guy, everything will come out. They come with replacement seals, they come with everything. So it's a full-blown cartridge shock. They're relatively easy to bleed. There's the bleed line. So you just don't thread it in. Well, you know what? We're going to build one, so you'll get to see it. There's a lot of volume in there. They do take a lot of oil. But they come as configured with the 4-hole pistons. They are very small holes. There's something like a 57, a number 57. And even with the holes that small, they require a very lightweight oil. For axials, you're going to want to start 40 to 50 weight, mostly because they're oversprung. They're all oversprung. These are probably, yeah. These are Capra Reds, which are like one of the softest springs in that length that you can find. Elements can be oiled a little lower. I generally start with 40, but I have run 35. I've run 30. You can change the pistons in them, but in the pistons that come as configured, I generally start with 40 weight on those as well. Incisions, which here's the problem with incisions. They give you one piston option. That piston option wants a lighter weight oil, but the lighter the oil weight, the faster it's going to leak out. I mean, that's just, you know, you ever had an old piece of crap car? Put some 20W50 in there, and then it'll leak out slower. It's kind of the same story with these guys. So this is kind of over-oiled. We would like it to extend a little bit quicker. It's close. It's close. This is running 50 weight. And you can, if you have a drift, if you have a full drill index, you can just drill the pistons out and then run heavier, because it would be great to run some 80 weight in there. Then it would leak out even more slowly. Desert Lizards, even with the 4-hole pistons, they like a really lightweight oil. A lot of these, I think I generally start, I've got my King bottle of 300 CST. And 300 CST to the Americans of the world falls in between 25 weight and 27.5 weight. So it's like 26 weight oil, which it comes with like elements. It comes with everything. It's way too light for element shocks. Element shocks need around a 40 weight. I tend to run 40 to 50 in Dravtex for whatever reason. Whereas on big bores, I tend to fill them with this. I fill them with the 300 CST. GTS shocks, depending on your springing. The springing does come into play a little bit. But that is running, it's running 300 CST. It's really difficult to actually determine what's in there with this spring pushing back. Let's see. Yeah. It's got a little schmutz on it. But like I say, these have been on a vehicle now for a good while. Desert Lizards, you're going to start at 300 CST with the 4-hole piston, and they come with 1-hole pistons, and I don't know. I've got shock oil down to 10 weight, which is as low as they go. You can get motorcycle fork fluid, which goes down to something like, because 10 weight is, well, okay, 20 weight is 200 CST, so 10 weight would be 100 CST. I've got some oil here that's like 75 CST, so it'd be like 7.5 weight, but I'm not going to recommend anyone run 7.5 weight. Like I said, I took all of these shocks, except for one, off of vehicles. That means I got to put all these back on. Oy. So, to kill some time, what we're going to do is we're going to assemble a Desert Lizard for use on the vehicle that it will be going into place on. We will be running them underslung, aka upside down, and they are fairly easy to construct. When the springs come out of the little package, they are full mated. Okay. So you will note, I've only in one instance used a heavier spring than the softest ones that they include, but that tends to be because I run them in droop. They've got some of these here that are very firm. On Jolly Green, I'm running him shocks upside down. So he's running the softest here, and he's running the medium here in the short above the piston, because he's a heavy boy. So they do give you a lot of springing options. I don't know. Like, he's 12.5 pounds-ish. You've got to, I guess, have a lot of weight. Well, he does have 6 wheels. Yeah, so if you have a 12.5 pound vehicle that only has 4 wheels, you're probably going to need something other than the super soft springs. So I run these in what I call full droop, which is I tend to put the longer spring here and the short spring down here. So what that is going to do is that at rest, we will assemble this before we oil it and fill it. At rest, the shock is going to sit like that and give you beep, beep. It's going to give you that little bit right there. Now that is set up to run this way. If you put them like this, it's not going to be great. You're not going to have a lot of wheel contact. So I recommend the Desert Lizard unless you have some sort of physical, something stopping you in the build of the vehicle. Like if you've got, say, for instance, AR-45s, which tends to put the panhard mount right where the shock is mounted. So I have a rig here, Rusty, has to be run this way because he can't run any sort of conventional shock. It would put the shock spring right into the panhard mount, which is a problem. So we were going to build these guys in more. Well, we'll let you look at the difference. If we assemble this guy, just the reverse of how they had it, because it is designed. I'm building it to run upside down. See, we just get that little bit. We just get that little bit more. It doesn't really affect this. We're probably, by going to this spring, we are shortening the amount that it can fully extend to by about 2 millimeters, maybe 2.5 millimeters. So what you can do is just, Desert Lizards come with a very small eye on the end. You can just put another eye on the bottom of the shock, make it a little bit longer, and then you've caught it back up. If I didn't finish the thought, Incision does that. So on these, this is the medium, and then there's a longer one and an even shorter one. So you can really customize in a couple millimeters difference in length. So I'm using almost all of those Incision ends. I don't know if I have one fitted with it. Yeah, there's a longer one. Where's that short one? Yeah. So see, you really can fine tune the length of the shocks. And they make I think it's in service on a rig, But I have they make a really short one. They have a very short one that comes, there it is. Yeah, they have a really short one, which will really bring it, which is actually probably, yeah, it's that short. So we can fine tune shocks. Like if we're losing some of this, like see, we can collapse all the way, and we're losing a little bit on extension because we have a spring between the piston and the body. And when we replace that spring with this spring, I mean, the total height difference collapsed between the longer spring and the shorter spring is not going to be significant. Like I say, about 2 millimeters maybe. I'm not worried about it. We should have plenty. This is a shock that has to be built as an emulsion shock, so we're going to try to minimize the air bubbles to an extent. I tend to just we go right to the bottom of the threads. This is one of the things where if the cartridge or anything inserts inside the shock, we're going to make a mess. A bunch of this is going to squirch out because even filled down to there, the threading doesn't go all the way down, but we're going to have to displace an amount of oil that is all of this. So we pretty much have to start overfilled, and I didn't get the wrench. We have to start overfilled and work our way to properly filled. Yes, and they do come with the wrench. And as I mentioned, we run a lot of Desert Lizards here, so look at all the wrenches. Yeah, every pair of shocks you buy comes with a wrench. And unlike other companies, I'm genuinely surprised. I'm surprised Yeah Racing doesn't sell like a premier, like long-handled, fancy anodized shock wrench. We just get these stamped ones. Get your paper towels ready. These are not that difficult, honestly, to build. It just, we're gonna get messy. More springs for the bins. Yeah, those are gone. So we're gonna displace, and because it's an emulsion shock, we don't have to. We're not super concerned about air bubbles. The only reason these shocks work is because there's an air bubble in there. Oh, yeah, it's all ready. We can make a. Then we can thread it in a little more. Some more air out. I'll keep trying to face it towards us. Then, generally how I do this is once we start to get this guy, oh, they're so slippery. Once we get to this guy, oh, still popping air bubbles. Once we get this guy down close, just keep giving it turns. And now, the fun part of the Desert Lizard, which is we're going to cinch this down, and then it's going to be over full. It's going to have a hydro lock to it. We squeezed out a bunch more oil, but it is still going to be over full. So not wildly over full, but still a little bit over full. So what I do is I back it out. Not to about there. A nice little puddle of oil there. A little more air coming out. Then what we try to do is, am I out of frame? Yeah, we're in frame a little bit. I try to keep it compressed a little bit, and my hands are so slippery at this point. This is the beauty of silicone oils. And also, with any cap that inserts from the inside, you have to be very cognizant of the fact that you can pinch the O-ring out of the body. So we don't want to over aggressively tighten this down. Keep checking it around. Keep checking it around. I don't see any O-ring poking out. It's a little, I mean, I think I've unintentionally built a little pack into it. Let's see. That's not bad, actually. That's not bad. We grab our good buddy, Mr. Shock Pliers. We'll thread the end on. And we have built a desert lizard the way I like to build them. This is exactly how Jolly Green's shocks are configured, save for he's got a little bit stiffer. So see, we're basically full droop because zoop, and then we've got this little bit right there. That actually, you know, I haven't figured out how to employ philo vision. And once you know it's set, you can give it an extra little, yeah, we got about a quarter turn on there. Because the way these seat, you can crank them down. Some shocks, if you crank them down too tight, it's just going to try to squidge the O-ring out. Yeah. So that right there, that little bit of shaft that won't go away, is because we've the spring in the bottom. We can't. So we've lost maybe 3 millimeters of the total travel, but that's okay, because what we've got is that. That's the important stuff. And then we've got, you did me right, Desert Lizard. The red light fever didn't set in at all. Now, for the fun of it, why not finish with the most difficult part to do? These are a little tricky. The good old 2660. And when you get it, you'll get all the parts you don't need. You don't even need to, oh damn, you do need to open that because it's got the cups. No, we're gonna run SE springs on it. So I don't even need that. The beauty of the 2660. I mean, come on. Come on. That's how they come. And they come assembled. You are generally going to need shock pliers to get them apart. Oh, yeah. And there's our boy. There's our boy. What renders the 2660 different from everyone else? We have a standard 2-hole piston. Oh, yeah. I would like to point out. So this is all the way at the bottom. So the shaft is all the way out. We've got a millimeter total. If you compare that to a typical Amazon shock, I should have popped the springs off of these. Beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, beep, boop, beep, boop, beep. I think these guys are probably worse. Oh, yeah. That ability to move mostly means it speaks to the seal pack, but it also speaks to the fact that the piston, the relationship between the piston and the body is not close. Like that is good right there. And we get nitrided shaft. How much of a difference that actually makes, I don't know. I generally configure these to be run upside down, because if you can run a shock upside down, run that shock upside down. And then I neglected to grab one. I'm just grabbing a random SE spring, and that's why this is beautiful. We've got the little shoulder, and they just pop right on. Beep. So it's nice. I tend to, like I say, I tend to pull this little limiter off because we don't need it. We're not taking it off any sweet jumps, bro. But what these do have is the bladder. Let's see if I can get the bladder out with just my finger. The part of it that always makes me nervous is trying to pry the bladder out of the cap, because we don't start with the bladder in the cap. So there's the bladder. If you've never built a bladdered shock, a non-emulsion shock, here we go. And we are going to start this guy, again, the bottle of 300 CST. They include oil. There's Traxxas silicone oil. Watch the bubble. And then if we watch the bubble, this is a big bubble. It's close enough. I think the Traxxas is supposed to be approximating like 30 weight. I think we're supposed to be right around 30 weight. I put the piston up about halfway. We're going to fill it to the top. And then we're just going to, I just one-shot it. I just go, whoop. And a big old air bubble is going to come out. But if you got lucky, one big old air bubble is going to come out, and then that's it. And then we're going to fill it up a little bit. so that we make sure we don't push the piston dry. We're going to come up, we're going to go back down, and we're going to look for air bubbles. There they are. Now, you don't want to cycle it a bunch of times, because what is going to then happen is any air that is trapped under is going to start emulsifying into the oil. We're okay with the air bubbles, but we're going to let them come to the top. You can expedite it if you're really in a hurry. I would say just build all 4 shocks at the same time, and then it's not a problem. Because what will happen is you'll get them emulsified, and then you'll put the bladder in and you build it, and you've just built air into the shock. And then that air is going to coalesce into one big bubble. And then as the shock cycles, it's going to break that bubble up, and it's going to emulsify it. And when you have emulsification and the shock isn't full, because that's why when you pick up an emulsion shock at the beginning, let's see if this one will do it. That's mostly spring noise. Sometimes you'll be able to hear a little bit of the cavitation. Yeah, there we go. So what we do is we go. Now we're just emulsifying. We're mixing the oil and the air. And now, when we slap this guy together, if we can get it together. Yeah, baby. So nice. That's how emulsification shocks work. A lot of people not only do it wrong, but tell people how to do it wrong. A shock has air in it. These shocks, any of these shocks, they have air in them. They have to. If they don't have air in them, they are not going to work. You'll have effectively built a hydraulic piston. And a hydraulic piston works by differentiating pressure, by lowering and increasing pressure. We can't do that. This shock has air in it. The air is emulsified into the oil. That's why if we do this, like, the sound will actually change. And then when we cycle it, oh man, it's so good. What we're building here is not that. This is not an emulsification shock. This is a bladdered shock, and what that bladder is doing is keeping a determined amount of air, and that amount of air lives. You see where that shoulder is up above the threads? That's where the air lives. So we are confining the air apart from the oil. So the way you do this is you grow a third arm, because that's kind of what's necessary to do. You are going to set the bladder atop the oil. You are going to wish for a third hand. You are going to press the center of the piston down, and you are going to try to get your third hand to cycle the shock up slightly. Oil's going to squidge. Then when you let it go, I don't even bother to wipe off very much. When you let it go, that piston, that bladder has been pulled down into the shock. So hopefully, here is the hope against hope. There is no air between the top of the surface of the oil and the bottom of the bladder. That's the goal. Then we want to tighten this down enough to where we're not going to reintroduce oil. So I'm not futzing with the shaft at all. I had a wrench. We're just going to have to go with the trusty old Cobalt. Have your tools ready ahead of time. This is what shock pliers are fantastic for. If you don't own shock pliers, you can do it. You can do it with the wrench. I forgot for just a moment that I have shock pliers. So we got the shock pliers. We'll just grab something to put some torque on it. And we're going to go real slow because we don't want to squidge the bladder. And I think we were successful. And how do you check? How do you check whether or not you were successful? At this point, we need a new paper towel because we are covered. Everything is covered in silicone at this point. So No sound. Has a little drawback at the bottom. So we'll go, hip, pulls back just a tiny bit. That is the bladder relaxing back the other way. Then when we go all the way down, we'll have a little press back because that is the piston relaxing back down. And that is how you build a 2660. And then if you take said 2660 and you build it underslung thusly, that oil is not going to leak out. You're not going to have to mess with those for a long time. And here's what's fun, everybody. Here's what's fun, and I neglected to remember. That's the exact same way you build a DriveTech. Exact same. Because inside it's the same stuff. You can also, should you so desire, you can either order. I've got some. Hold on. Just hold on. I've got some. You can order caps from DriveTech to turn your 2660s into DriveTech. This allows you to use a rod end at the top, which will allow you to even more configuration over the length of the shock. Or you can indeed do it yourself. You can just sand this off, and then there's a little dimple in the middle from where it was machined. You can just drill a hole through and just bolt a rod end to it. I don't have a problem with them being run like this, so I tend to just run them that way. So there it is. Like I say, if you're going to buy a shock, if you're say you're building a rig, and I don't mean you're assembling a rig, you're building a rig out of bits and pieces. You're putting different axles on something that didn't come with those axles. There's absolutely nothing wrong at all, and it is actually a pretty good option to start with some Desert Lizards, because they will give you so many tuning options for free. Like, they come with the shock. The only thing a Desert Lizard shock doesn't come with is oil. Like, if they came with, and I mean, they can't. They've really kind of perfected their little packaging scenario that they've got going on here. But what a great shock for tunability. And then, should you want to change to something cosmetically, I understand people who don't like the appearance cosmetically of Desert Lizards. I get it. Like, they're not super foxy. They do come in a bunch of different colors. And performance-wise, I have zero complaints about Desert Lizards. They don't leak. They tend to fit pretty well. No, I take that back. I rescind. Because of the way Desert Lizards are constructed, they use a special fitting up at the top. They use a special ball. And man, sometimes you think you're prepared. And I mean, I spend so much time taking shocks off of vehicles. Desert Lizards run these little guys at the top, and that's all you can run. They have to run this. So it can give you issues on mounting them upside down on some vehicles that, like, see, they tend to run a flathead screw to give it some room to pivot. You can get away with a washer on that side sometimes, or a little small spacer. But there are some rigs where it's a little more difficult to get these mounted upside down than it is to get them mounted right side up. So I definitely recommend here in the last minute, if you're fitting Desert Lizards to your rig and you intend to run them upside down, which is the way I recommend, make sure that you can do so. Dry fit them, because like I say, this is how they come out of the foam. Just pop the pivot balls in and dry fit them on the vehicle and see how it sits. And then you can determine some of your springing solutions before you even put the oil in. Like, you can preset your ride height effectively. And other shocks, it's not as easy to do that. Like, it's a bit more trial and error. The Desert Lizard is the one shock I can think of, now that I'm thinking about it, that allows you to, like, you can pre-vis your suspension setup. And they come in different colors. So I am sure, I'm 100% sure, there's a bunch of stuff I didn't cover. And the thing is, you can't remember what you don't remember because you don't remember it to remember it. So if you have any questions please do answer below. Please do ask below. I would say, okay, if you've bought kits or built shocks before, you probably have some 300 CST lying around. If not, here's what I would say. You go to your place, buy 30 weight, 40 weight, and 50 weight. That's going to cover 90% of what you need. Unless you're fiddling with Amazon shocks. They are definitely going to need differential fluid. I would say 5,000, which is 5,000 CST. I would say 5,000 and 7,000 is what I use most commonly to fill Amazon shocks, which again, aside from very select and rare instances, I don't recommend that you do that. But if you do, just know you're going to need diff oil at like $12 a bottle. So your cost saving measure turns out to be a false economy, because you're going to need to buy $25 in oil for your $20 shocks. Whereas if you had just bought Desert Lizards or 2660s for the same money, you can fill them with whatever bottle of oil you have lying around. And if they still feel too slow, you can just take a small pin drill and drill the pistons out a little bigger. Suspension tuning is very super situational. Filling a shock is a thing that people, I think, should know how to do. Setting the shock up on the vehicle is something that's going to come by feel over time. It really is, because you could have a chart and you could have white papers and you could have everything else, but moving a shock forward one hole might make that spring too soft. Now the rear might feel over-damped or under-damped. I get a lot of comments from folks saying that it looks like I'm under-damped. And we'll grab this guy again because he's right over my head, because this guy can do this. So, I mean, it's very soft, right? Well, I mean, look at the angle that his shocks are at, right? So he's running very stiff springs. And in the front, it's much firmer in the front. Probably about twice as firm on the damping rate. So that guy is tuned like that because I'm sacrificing some ability to damp at the extreme for overall compliance. Like, he will lift a tire, but he's going to keep good ground contact with big flex. And like I say, like, he is very situational. So no one else is going to be set up exactly like that. We do one-on-ones around here. Filling these, though, this is rules. This is how this is done. Filling these, this is rules. This is how it's done. It's much easier to do ones like this. They have a bleeder screw. If a shock has a bleeder screw, boy, talk about burying this. You fill it with oil. You can fill it all the way up. This screw is out. You thread the cap all the way down. You go like this. You've got your driver or your wrench. You've got this guy sitting over here with this screw on the end of it. You go whoop, and you dial the screw in, and you're done. That's it. That's how you build. That's how you build a shock with a bleeder screw on it. They are the easiest, but you're also you don't have as fine of control, I guess. And if you have an incision and it gets leaky, they're just going to get the damping effect is going to just go away more and more and more. So don't try to compensate for that loss of damping effect by putting heavier weight oil in it. It's not that it needs heavier oil, it's that it needs less air. It needs just the right amount of air. Yeah, I don't know. I've lost a lot of the plot. You should have one of these. Absolutely. If you're going to build a shock at all ever, have a pair of shock pliers. They're fantastic. For everything else too, for building links, for whatever. I'll have one in the links below. If you don't have one of those, you should have one of those. I use it every single day. I will thank you again all for watching. I will invite you to comment below because I know that there's stuff I didn't cover, so let me know what I didn't cover. I have to put all of these shocks back on vehicles now. This isn't even all of them. Oh, God, there's two more over here. I will see you in the next one. Oh, there's oil everywhere. Thank you all for watching. Subscribe if you haven't. Consider channel membership, etc. We're going to get on to other stuff. It's Tech Notes We'll see you in the next one, everybody. Oh, the cleanup's going to take as long as the video did. We'll see you next time.